So by trade, I guess I'm a paramedic. I've come into the academic field quite late in life, and I guess I've got some experience as a paramedic, and I've tried to bring that into my practice and into the learning and development of students. We've hit some challenges, as we always do, when we find a new space and a new workplace. And one of these was the ability to be able to provide a realistic environment for simulation for paramedic practice. This project that we've been working on, Mesh 360, Multiple Environment Simulation Hub. The idea behind this is that we want to promote different environments and different thought processes for paramedics when they're actually performing clinical practice. So what is a paramedic? Just to give it context, you know, we sort of see all these advertisements, and it's all exciting and you know, lots of glitz and glamour and flashy lights.
Studying paramedicine.
And no internet.
Something different every day, and that's kind of.
So this is Sam. Sam
Office.
was one of our recent graduates. I'm going to just move on. One of our recent graduates. And in this, it kind of gives a really sort of exciting overview. There's fast music. There's scenes about resuscitation, chest compression, saving lives, as ambulance people do. The reality of it is that we need to make our students
Unfortunately, that Instagram is ready.
road ready. We need to make them ready for industry so that they can perform those skills and actually save a life. So the question is when Stu Cook and Noel Wilkinson and I first started, we came into this environment and we asked, well, how do we currently teach somebody to save a life? And the reality of it is that this would be a standard scenario process. You'd have a high fidelity mannequin who breathes, talks, blinks, has heart sounds, abdominal sounds, pulses as a normal person would. But of course he is plastic, which is always hard. But what makes it even harder is that, as you can see in this environment here, it's static. It doesn't really influence anything about decision making or the process of treating that patient. Whereas the reality of paramedicine is that anybody can have an accident or an incident at any part or any time of their life or in any environment. So this was a challenge for us to get a student to come into this environment and actually mentally picture a different environment, because the environment in itself does offer lots of clues. As a paramedic, when I go into somebody's home, actually the last person I'm looking at is the patient, believe it or not. I walk into an environment and I'm looking for clues around that environment. I'm looking for the man in the corner with the knife, the medications in the corner which they may have taken an overdose on, the blood which may be in the floor, the vomit which is over here, the smell within the room. So all of these factors influence my decision making even before I've got to the patient. But we can't recreate this in this environment, so it was a challenge for us. And then we asked ourselves, well, does this work when we show half a torso with no arms in a static environment which offers no influence or no additional clinical decision-making information? And so we kind of agreed we're doing it the same way, and we continue to do it this way, bearing in mind that that type of scenario that we see here has been in practice and is currently in practice for near on 20 years. There are different levels of technology, but the environment is static. So we kind of stepped back and reflected upon this, and we asked ourselves, well, firstly, does it work? Do we offer a real environment for clinical decision making? And the answer is no. We offer a patient where they can make clinical decision making, but nothing else. Paramedics need clinical dexterity. So this was a problem for us. So how do we get clinical dexterity but offer a different environment? And this is where we came up with technology. Now, whilst we didn't want technology to drive the idea of how we practice clinically, we wanted it to supplement what we do clinically. Situate learning in authentic context determined by the learner. So, as we'll see in the following slides, we've actually taken some scenes in a 360 environment and we've given it to the students to review by way of safety, and I'll show you what I mean by this in a moment. But we've actually also given the equipment back to the students and said, there's the equipment, you now go make the environments. Not procedural process, but experience, not contrived to technology. We wanted real world learning so that when they do go out into the real world and work on a real ambulance, that they're prepared. They're ready to treat people in different environments. Applications for distance learning. We moved towards one of our ideas being around virtual reality. So simple devices like this, which cost a couple of dollars, gave us some scope to be able to promote some ideas towards distant students. Understanding potential for associated harm. And what I mean by this is not only physical from those who are caught up in an environment where a man may be caught hiding with a knife in the corner, which does happen, as we all know of recent times, but also the emotional safety. When we put a student through a simulation experience, what stress are they under and how do they cope with the stress? And this is really important, and I'll give you an example of this shortly. So we used a design-based research model. We came up with a series of problems. We tried to develop ideas around those problems, test those ideas, reflect, and we cycle around again. And I'll just quickly give you an idea of sort of how we've developed in 3 iterations some of these ideas. So we've got 360-degree images which regards to personal safety. So what we've asked the paramedics to do is take a 360 headset with a 360 image. And within those images, we've put information in there that is relevant to their clinical practice. Now, it may well be based on signs and symptoms you see in a patient. It might be something as obvious as a knife in their chest. Or it may be, as I've explained before, it may be a medication which is in the corner. Or it may be the blood or vomit in the corner, which again is all part of the process of their decision making before they actually get to the patient. The second iteration that we did was we started to explore the idea of an immersive simulation. What I mean by immersive simulation is because paramedicine and our teaching requires dexterity, it requires us to touch people and feel and examine. It's very difficult to do that with this. So what we tried to do, and what we're still trying to do, is to develop an environment which we can actually change. And that environment means that we can project on a simple square room, we can project a scene in 360 mode of any environment that we want. So we could simply get a paramedic to walk into a room and be on top of a mountain. We can get them to walk into a room and be into a major car crash. We can put them in any environment we want them to do at the flick of a switch. So that was the development around the 360 immersive simulation. The third iteration, which we're currently working on now, is about the stress. And we mentioned before, not only the safety in the environment of understanding risk by way of the man with the knife in his hand, but also by way of the stress of the personal well-being of that student. And again, what we know is in early tests is that there's enormous amounts of stress. And we need to be able to condition our students in order for them to go into the real world and actually cope with that stress. And there are many, many levels of complexity to stress. So we can add smell, we can add noise, we can add just a simple environment of being on top of the mountain, and we can also add temperature. We can change the temperature in a room to make it cold or really, really hot. And it's really, really interesting what we found. And again, I'll show you an example of this shortly. So the first thing that we tried was 360-degree images. It was really important for us to make this accessible. I'm quite intimidated by this box here. It looks fantastic. But we can't give this to every student. We just can't do it. So that's why we went with something like this, $2. Everybody can afford these. In fact, we were talking about putting them into the student fees. We can give them to the student, and then we can put them into an environment. This environment itself, as I've mentioned, could be any environment. We started to experiment with some 360-degree images. This was just a kind of a showcase of a 360-degree, which maybe will work or not. Or not. This is a short video which the student, imagine a first year student who has no knowledge of what a paramedic does. We can show them this video.
Paramedic labs where our students practice for real world situations like resuscitation, which we're practicing here.
They can rotate around the video and explore the scene to see actually what a paramedic does. We can then take them into the back of an ambulance to see what the back of an ambulance looks like, so they can explore and experience the back of an ambulance with real sounds and noise. For a distant student who's maybe considering paramedicine, this should give them a real nice exposure.
And this allows our students to have a real life experience.
So we can, again, we can So it gives them an experience of a resuscitation in the back of an ambulance, an experience of the classroom, how we would teach simulation. And this was kind of the early stages of our exploration into 360. What we later started to use was, we used a 360 image. In this particular image, not that you can make out, was kind of an industrial scene. And in this industrial scene, we did have a man with a knife who was hidden. We had wires exposed near to water. We had a patient on the floor who had a series of clear symptoms that they were able to try and work their way through and process. And we were able to, via free software called SeekBeak, we were able to collate and collect where their images and concentration was developed. And this gave us a real insight into what they noticed and what they didn't notice. What we found from this, which was really interesting, is that the man that was hidden in the doorway here, only 30% of them actually noticed. So huge danger and risk that they're putting themselves into when they go into an environment which is unusual to them.
We've probably got about 2 minutes, Steve.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Pedagogical point of view, we gave the students their own camera, they can develop their own films, they can develop their own ideas around what a scene could or should be like. From an immersive simulation, we can put them into a room which could be on fire, which could be part of a post-earthquake. You can see the mannequin right at the bottom, so that we still involve them in the tactile clinical techniques that's required. The stress component, well, we know, and this is, there's lots and lots of information on this in literature. We know that people cope well, some people cope well with stress and some people don't cope well with stress. But from a point of view of performance, they still need to perform. Now, from an ambulance officer's point of view, if they simply cannot perform under stress, they're going to struggle. So we need to help them, condition them, and actually give them some direction and support in a stressful environment. So what we decided to do, well, not decided, we got in touch, we were approached by a company in Chile, and we've, in conjunction with them, we've had a biometric feedback device which records a sympathetic and parasympathetic response on the nail bed. And this is a kind of a fight or flight type response. So when the paramedic had this device on and they were put in a stressful simulation, we can record this stress in a quantitative way. Now you can also see here that the paramedic, the porter says, the lights pour, is actually performing a scenario, a clinical scenario in the environment. What was really, really interesting is that we compared novice with those who were more experienced. first portion of this video I'm going to show you, I want you to pay attention to, it's really important, is, if it works, is that we put a novice student in the clinical environment, a first year student, to treat a patient who was septic, had an infection. But what we also did was we put a real chainsaw in the room with real chainsaw noise and petrol on the floor. It was done in a relatively safe way. And what we noticed was, as those novice practitioners who went into that room and they tried to treat what is ordinarily a pretty straightforward patient, they really struggled because of the stress of the noise and the environment and the smell. And they sat there and they treated this patient for 15 minutes with the chainsaw on. And you'll see what I mean by the noise in a moment. Whereas when we had those who were more experienced, they walked into the same environment with the same patient, they assessed the patient's basics from the get-go, and then the next thing they did was they went over and turned the chainsaw off.
We'll have to wrap it up pretty quick here, Steve.
If the video works. So at this point in time, where's the future? There's the chainsaw. At this point in time, the future for us means that we want to try and develop an understanding of stress within paramedicine. We want to try and develop an immersive environment for them to work in a real world situation. And we want to be able to best protect them and support them in their future as a paramedic by giving them the tools to be able to cope with stress. This guy here was a first year student. I'll play just the first part of the chainsaw as I've mentioned, and you'll see the difference. It doesn't make logical sense to actually go through the simulation to do what he did, but the stress of the patient in front of him made him so, he was overwhelmed. Now, I can show you it later if we're really running.